The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this February 3rd, 2016 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can catch my show every evening from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. That's on FirstAmendmentRadio.com Pacific Time, or at 11 a.m. Pacific Time on First Amendment Radio. Or if you can't watch either of those shows, go to my website, www.arcticbeacon.com. Now, I started in journalism as a newspaper reporter way before the internet was even around. And yesterday I touched on the life and tragic story of a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter, Gary Webb, who broke the story of the CIA's involvement in the importation of cocaine into the U.S. He died December 10th, 2004, reportedly from self-inflicted gunshot wounds to the head.
Is telling people something that the government doesn't want them to know.
Okay, the people who put this little tribute together of Gary Webb had this to say, and I wanted to read this to you. They said in August 1996, this is just to refresh your memory, folks, the San Jose Mercury News published Webb's 20,000-word three-part series entitled Dark Alliance. The articles detailed a nexus between a California coke kingpin, CIA officials, and assets in the Nicaraguan Contra Army, whose funding had been cut off by an act of Congress in the mid-'80s. Webb found evidence that the CIA had direct contact with the smugglers, knew the proceeds were going to fund the murderous Contras, and tried to cover it up when other law enforcement agencies began investigating. The most troubling aspect to the story was the central player. The most troubling aspect of the story was that the central player was no ordinary drug lord. He was the man many credit for popularizing crack, the highly addictive, smoke-able form of cocaine. For many African Americans, the story smacked of grand conspiracy to destroy the black community. There were rallies in Watts and Compton and heated discussions on black media across the country. Members of the Congressional Black Caucus called for a federal investigation. In November 1996, CIA Director John Deutsch appeared at Locke High School in South Central LA to personally answer the allegations. He was met with loud jeers. It was a PR disaster. But it was Webb who found himself on the ropes. Ironically, the CIA did little to publicly counter his allegations. Instead, the media did its dirty work for them, like he said. Most notably, the Los Angeles Times and the Washington Post. The mainstream media accused Webb of exaggerating his findings. For Webb, the most confounding part of the whole affair was that he ended up being accused of making allegations he never made, specifically that the CIA crack connection was part of a larger genocidal plot to kill off black people. Webb never made that claim, though he noted it in his book Dark Alliance, the CIA, the Contras, and the crack cocaine explosion. The inherent racism in a covert policy that reaped so much destruction on such a vulnerable segment of society. He wrote, Dark Alliance does not propound a conspiracy theory. There is nothing theoretical about history. In this case, it is undeniable that a wildly successful conspiracy to import cocaine existed for many years, and that innumerable American citizens, most of them poor and black, paid an enormous price as a result. This book was written for them, so that they may know upon what altars their communities were sacrificed. The fact is, by 1996, it was common knowledge in the so-called alternative media that there were connections between the Contras, the agency, and the drugs. In 1988, a Senate subcommittee investigation headed by John Kerry concluded that links were there. Oliver North's own diary noted $14 million to buy arms for the Contra came from drugs. Nevertheless, Webb's editors at the Mercury News hung him out to dry, without ever providing any evidence that any of his reporting was wrong. He was reassigned and forced out. Webb went on to work as an investigator for the state of California, penning a report on racial profiling by state police. More recently, he landed a reporting job at the Sacramento newspaper. In honor of Webb's legacy of authentic journalism, this interview was presented discussing Dark Alliance, the media maelstrom, and the story's historical importance. So that's what they had to say about Gary. And it's interesting to note that interview was done not long before they said he was suicided. Now, we talked about that the other day, and the coroner's report said 2 gunshot wounds to the head. Go figure. I think it was a botched hit. But anyway, that's something that you'll have to check out for yourself. Okay, I also found this done much earlier, right when the story was written. So let's see what happened, what he was going through during that initial period.
His story, the most controversial of the past year, because after investigating the origins of the crack epidemic, he claimed he found a link leading right to the CIA.
Men who were working for the CIA's army were responsible for bringing all that cocaine into Los Angeles that sparked the crack epidemic.
The CIA's army, Webb says, were the Contras, the anti-communist rebels fighting the government of Nicaragua back in the 1980s, an army founded and funded by the CIA. Webb wrote that some Contra supporters smuggled cocaine to America to raise money for their cause.
The CIA has been bringing drugs into this country.
As then CIA Director John Deutsch discovered, it's an accusation that rings true for many, especially for some in the African American community. And Webb's story has taken on a life of its own.
Hey, Gary,
On the talk show circuit and the internet, some have even gone beyond Webb's charges to accuse the CIA of conspiring to target young African Americans.
was the CIA willing to poison our cities and crack cocaine?
On the basis of what you learned, do you believe that there was a conscious decision, a meeting where someone sat down and said, we're going to poison the youth of Black America and here's how we're going to do it?
No, I don't. These guys were looking to raise money, and I don't think it mattered to them where they did it. They just went where they could raise the money.
Gary Webb says his stories were largely based on the testimony of a drug dealer with Contra connections who became a U.S. government witness. But 9 months after the series was published, the controversy continues. Some of the heavyweights of American journalism have examined Webb's work and found it reckless, often wrong. Just this week, Webb was pulled off the CIA story after his own executive editor admitted the articles oversimplified the origins of the crack epidemic and left out important conflicting evidence. He also wrote, I feel that we did not have proof that top CIA officials knew. But despite the evidence to the contrary, Gary Webb insists his stories were substantially accurate. And many Americans do seem willing to believe that their own government could have been involved in drug smuggling. So was the U.S. government involved in any way? Dateline decided to take a second look. Crack use spread like wildfire in the early 1980s. And in Los Angeles, a drug dealer known as Freeway Ricky Ross was in the middle of it. Prosecutors called Ross the Walmart of crack. He made millions in the early 80s dealing to Los Angeles street gangs. Police say he was among the first to take expensive cocaine powder and cook it into low-cost, highly addictive crack, then distribute it through the gangs. Webb says Freeway Ricky helped trigger an epidemic of human misery.
It's destroyed our community. All the black men are in prison, most of us.
Rick Ross is now serving a life sentence for cocaine distribution.
The women are still strung on the drugs. Kids without fathers, without mothers.
And honestly, how much responsibility do you have for that?
A lot. A lot of it was my fault. I played the game.
Police in Los Angeles say he virtually cornered the crack market, thanks to a steady supply of cheap cocaine. A pipeline so good that Ross was able to introduce crack to other cities, using his gang contacts, and to make himself, he says, a very rich man.
6 shots fired, tag 8.
On your best day, how much money did you see?
Couple million, 2, 3 maybe.
A day.
On a good day.
How many days like that were there?
A few. Quite a few.
Rick Ross's drug supplier did have connections to the Contras. Dateline has been able to confirm that from former Contra leader Eden Pastora. And Pastora admits he received some aid from that drug supplier. But Pastora says he was not aware of any CIA drug connection. So we asked Gary Webb, where is the evidence the CIA knew of any drug dealing?
You have to define the CIA. If you're saying that people who were working with the CIA know they were doing it, yeah. Did the director of the Central Intelligence Agency know this? I don't know. This is nonsense.
Now retired, Dewey Claridge was the CIA's man in charge of Central America in the early 80s. He insists the agency had nothing to do with any drug trafficking or with any cover.
Well, there we go. I just wanted to play you some of the things that were going on then, the cover-up behind this story by Gary Webb, when, like he said, it was a concerted effort to basically take him down when he had the truth and the evidence, the documentation that was provided on his website. But did you see what Dateline was trying to do? Then I found Ricky Ross, Freeway Ricky Ross, being interviewed at a later date while he's still in jail on the Montel Williams show. Let's take a listen.
Yesterday we were in San Diego, California, talking with one of the country's most notorious drug dealers, Mr. Ricky Ross, better known as Freeway Rick. Take a look at this tape.
I think I'm an expert on cocaine. There's not many people that has dealt with as much cocaine as I have. I think I'm an expert. I've saw people strung out from snorting cocaine, where they snort cocaine all day long. I saw them take powder and put it in cigarettes and smoke it, just like a rock smoker will. Or they'll smoke back to back to back.
Well, Ricky Ross is right now facing a life sentence, but he says he deserves to be a free man. Why? Because he says the CIA used him as a pawn to sell drugs to help fund the secret war in Nicaragua. Take a look at this tape.
If it was good for them to sell drugs, then it should have been good for me to sell drugs. The money from the drugs went to buy guns for the Contras.
Now, Ricky Ross compared himself to Superfly, the character from the 1970s movie, who seemed to have it all.
Cocaine was like a situation like party, like have fun, like it's like just being cool, it wasn't nothing negative about it, it wasn't ever. We didn't ever see a crack mother. It wasn't no crack mothers. It wasn't nobody strung out on cocaine. It was like the people that was buying, made $500-600 a week, drove brand new cars, had nice looking women, wore nice clothes. You know what I'm saying?
Well, Ricky Ross lost it all when he was arrested on cocaine trafficking charges last year. And Ricky Ross is right now at the center of one of the country's biggest controversies when it comes to drug. And I'll tell you something. If this controversy continues to escalate the way it has, and it will, I think this country is going to stop for a second and say it's wake-up call time. I think right now what we need to do is try to figure out whether or not there's any truth to this. So today we're going to discuss it. And my first guest worked for the government of the United States, for the Drug Enforcement Agency, for 25 years. He recently wrote a book called Triangle of Death, which he wrote and says it was written as fiction because if you had written it as fact, well, please welcome Mr. Michael Levine to the show. Yeah. If you had written this book as a fact and told some of the true stories that you could tell, what would happen?
I just couldn't. Let me explain why.
Sure.
I was a deep cover agent. Deep cover agents are a small group of people who pose as criminals and go into other countries. For instance, the Arab terrorist role in the book is one I actually played. And we are sent into these countries to live on our acting ability. There's no 911 to call. the mission is to reach the top of the drug world. And I was a deep cover agent. I lived with Chinese drug dealers in Bangkok, Thailand during the Vietnam War. I lived with ex-Nazis and Argentine mass murderers in Argentina.
Well, at that time, you weren't a DEA agent.
No, I was in the hard narcotics smuggling unit of customs. And the case that I was living with these Chinese drug dealers led me right to Chiang Mai. It was the first case that was killed by Central Intelligence. Ironically, it was a case that involved the smuggling of heroin into the U.S. in the dead bodies of GIs. Now, this was my first instance where I was brought into the embassy in the middle of the night. I was being forced by my government, mysteriously, suddenly, to lie to the drug dealers. All logistic support was withdrawn. And the drug dealers had bought my act. I get over pretty good. I grew up in the South Bronx. My brother was a heroin addict. As a matter of fact, I'm a Jew who grew up in a Puerto Rican black neighborhood. And as a kid, I used to lie and say I'm half Puerto Rican. So I was kind of undercover, like right away, right from the get-go.
Okay, so I think it's good to go over this old Montel Williams show, and we're going to do that in the second half hour. And the reason I do this is because we are so quick to forget all this stuff. This only happened 10 years ago? And do you realize that it's worse now? And I guess when Montel Williams said it's a wake-up call, I guess nobody's gotten up yet, right? Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately. and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal on this February 3rd, Wednesday, 2016 day on our calendar. And before I get back to that Montel Williams interview with Michael Levine, and then I believe he speaks with Gary Webb, let's fast forward a bit to when the CIA, or when the government actually admitted to drug smuggling, and it was just a bit too late for Gary Webb, who years earlier said committed suicide with 2 gunshot wounds to the head. I think it was a botched hit. Gary's not with us, but listen to this.
Partly because of her controversial drug stand, President Clinton fired his Surgeon General. But there was more disturbing news in the fall of 1993 when a report revealed that the government itself may have been running drugs. The head of the DEA at the time, Robert Bonner, said that a ton of pure cocaine worth hundreds of millions of dollars had been smuggled into the United States. And he blamed the CIA, saying the agency had joined the Venezuelan National Guard in drug smuggling.
Let me understand what you're saying. A ton of cocaine was smuggled into the United States of America by the Venezuelan National Guard? Well, in cooperation with the CIA?
That's exactly what appears to have happened. Bonner said he was the only one who could have approved transportation of illegal narcotics such as cocaine, and that this shipment had entered the country without his authorization.
Let me put it this way, Mike. If this has not been approved by DEA or an appropriate law enforcement authority in the United States, then it's illegal. It's called drug trafficking. It's called drug smuggling.
Former DEA agent Levine said that equally shocking was the fact that for more than 30 years, the federal government had protected some drug dealers.
Okay, that 60 Minutes report, which went on, came out after Gary Webb supposedly committed suicide. I think it was a hit. So let's get back to Michael Levine on the Montel Williams show.
Good training.
You trained yourself well from a young age.
And I was a bad kid. I was arrested twice before I was 16. Had I been arrested 1 week later, I could never have been a federal agent. They were considered juvenile offenses. I wanted to live out a James Bond fantasy. I got into a fight with a guy who was a heavyweight boxer, a martial artist when I was in the military. And in a heartbeat, I learned how short life is. The guy pulled a gun, stuck it in my stomach. A fellow military policeman pulled the trigger and it misfired. From that time on, I wanted to live out every fantasy I could. And I aimed myself to be a deep cover agent. Where's a poor kid from the Bronx? How do you get to live that kind of life? And I did. I lived out every fantasy you could imagine.
Over 25 years, you did this all over the world.
All over the world. Every country we name in the book, I was there.
And name the countries that you name in the book.
Well, from Bangkok, Thailand, Buenos Aires, Argentina. I lived there for 3 years. Mexico, Colombia, Panama, Bolivia, Germany, France, you name it. I've been there posing as a criminal. And in every case, including probably the biggest case in our history, I reached the top of the drug world. And to go back to the original question, and let me get to what happened when I reached the top of the drug world. The original question is, why can't I tell this? It's nonfiction. Well, when you become a deep cover agent, you're in violation of these countries' laws. If you screw up, you die. There's no doubt about it, and agents have died. In fact, the death I write about, the tortured death, one that's linked to CIA, comes from real life. You die. So the one rule that you live by is, and they tell this to you, resolve every situation in your own favor. And it is better to be tried by 12 than carried by 6. Now, when you live that rule, even though I was watching my brother die, heroin addict, die inch by inch, and even though I believed I was doing right, I knew I was doing a lot of wrong things to survive. Anybody who does that has to survive, has to do everything they can. Now, the point is, when you live by that rule, you can't come out and talk about it. So you unwittingly join the U.S. government mafia, of which part the CIA is the kingpin, the Don.
So you're saying that the CIA is the kingpin of the head of the United States Mafia?
I've put thousands of people in jail. Thousands. DEA gave a British writer once a figure of 3,000. It was a lot more than that. I've never failed in putting a case before court, conspiracy cases, undercover cases. I've never lost a case. In every one of these cases, what I'm talking about is I have a lot of credibility. I live by my credibility. So when I say I have personal testimony about Central Intelligence killing, murdering cases, one case, the biggest drug case I think in our history, Operation Trifecta, was a case where, posing as a mafia don, Luis Miguel Garcia, we went to Bolivia. We plugged into a pipeline of massive amounts of cocaine going from Bolivia through Mexico with the protection of the Mexican army into California. Both the CIA and the State Department and the Justice Department ganged up to kill that case.
To stop the case?
To murder that case. Absolutely. Why? Murder that case. Well, there's several reasons. First, all I can do is testify as I would in federal court as to what happened. I'm in Panama. We ordered 15 tons of cocaine to go through Mexico, be paid for in Panama, into the U.S. from Bolivia.
Stop there for a second, Michael. You're in Panama. You are a deep cover agent for the United States.
Suddenly, all logistics support is taken away.
But wait a second. But they told you, as a deep cover agent, to buy cocaine and send it through this country and bring it into the United States of America.
Yeah, to catch the cocaine was never intended to reach the U.S. It was going to be sold to undercover agents. The important thing to know is that we plugged into a pipeline that existed for years.
Okay.
And that pipeline, massive amounts of cocaine were flowing from Bolivia, also Colombia. We learned that during this investigation. Massive amounts were going onto the streets of the U.S. At that time, I already knew my daughter was a cocaine addict. I had already lost my brother. At that time, had already committed suicide. Wrote a note to my family and friends. I just can't stand the drugs anymore. 19 years of addiction. So there I am at the biggest case in our history, at the top of the drug world. I'm in Panama, in a country that was being run by a CIA employee, basically, Manuel Noriega. And my government suddenly withdraws logistics support. And then the other Chicano-Mexican undercover agent, we were forced to lie. We were forced to lie to these people who could kill us in a heartbeat, because our government had withdrawn logistics support. In a screaming argument I had midnight, and I describe it in a nonfiction book, my DEA supervisor tells me, as an explanation, the CIA is in this in 4 countries. We're not telling you everything.
Okay, wait, I got to hold you there for a second. I have to take a break. But the reason why Michael is here today is because we are going to talk about this entire thing that's rumbling all over America. Was the CIA responsible for, in any way, shape, or form, funneling cocaine into the United States of America, helping to turn it into crack, and turning it into what is now devastated the majority of the inner cities of America? A lot of people say that this is just another bull case drawn up by black people who are just so paranoid to say that everything is a conspiracy. But today you're going to meet several people who are former employees of our United States government, people who have looked at this over years, who will say, whether it was a conspiracy or not, they don't want to talk about it. But did the CIA know that drugs were coming into the United States of America and help it get here? The answer to the question is yes.
Absolutely.
Does the CIA do this on a regular basis? The answer to the question is
absolutely. I wish I could take them to court.
And right now, just by virtue of the fact that Montel Williams is doing the show, someone is going to say, you see, it's another black journalist who is feeding into the conspiracy story. And most of you who know me know I'm probably one of the most conservative people in this country. I spent 20 years in the United States government working for the military. This show is about finding some truth and saying to the American people, let us get the answers that we demand, because it's our dollars that paid to bring coke to America. We'll be back right after this. caught rumors. The rumor that the CIA was involved in making sure that cocaine made it to the streets of South Central LA back in the early 80s, and then helped to develop and turn it into crack, which was then spread across America, and is the reason why most of our inner cities are in the plight that they are in. And a lot of this has been out there for years, but it wasn't until recently that the story broke again. And my next guest is a reporter, not from San Diego, California, but from San Jose Mercury News, and he wrote a story called The Dark Alliance. Please welcome Mr. Gary Webb to the show. And Gary, this really, I think the current fervor over this issue is because of your article. A lot of people may not be familiar with what the Dark Alliance meant and stands for. Why don't you tell America what the story is about first, and then we'll talk about the issues.
It was about a cocaine ring that operated along the west coast of the United States throughout most of the 80s. And they were they were selling cocaine in South Central. They were also selling it in Oakland. They were selling it in San Francisco. They were selling it in San Jose. And some of the money they were making was going to support an army that the men who ran the cocaine ring worked for, called the FDN. This was an army that the CIA started in 1981 and supported.
Better known to us, most of us who remember news, the Contras in Nicaragua. So go right ahead.
The men that were running the cocaine ring were top officials of this Contra army. And what we found was that they were selling this stuff in South Central, which is predominantly black section of Los Angeles, immediately before the outbreak of the crack cocaine epidemic. They started selling powder. Tons and tons and tons of powder cocaine was going into this one small area of the city. And from there, they sold it to Freeway Rick. And Freeway Rick took the powder, turned it into crack, and starting in 1983, 1984, began distributing it to predominantly the gangs, the Crips and the Bloods in Los Angeles. And they spread it, from there.
From there. Now, since this has happened, you have butted heads with everybody in Washington, D.C., trying to get information about the story, have you not?
Yeah, we worked on this for a year, and it was only because, some people at National Archives believe freedom of information means freedom of information. We got some documents that showed that pretty strongly there were some CIA connections.
Let's talk a little bit about those documents for a second, because there's a gentleman, this figure that we talked about yesterday on the show. His name is Blandone. Danilo Blandone, who was a person who was a member of the aristocracy of Nicaragua before the fall of Somoza, and then he fled and comes to the United States and decides, while he's in the United States, so you can all understand this, he wants to raise money for the revolutionaries who are trying to overthrow the government that just overthrew them. So here in the United States, they try to do fundraisers, and that doesn't work, and then Blandone gets a scheme. Well, I can get some cocaine cheaply with some help from some of my friends and get it into the United States of America. All I need to find is somebody who can sell it. So they find a gentleman by the name of Rick Ross, who is Freeway Rick. Rick Ross comes in and starts selling cocaine at the terms beginning 1 or 2 grams. And within weeks, 2, 3, 4 kilos a week. Within months, what was it, 10 to 15 kilos a day. Ricky Ross was selling cocaine to the point of making $3 to $4 million a day. He sold so much cocaine, it hurt his fingers to count the money. Not only in Los Angeles, but in Cincinnati, in St. Louis, all the way across America. So some can say, and this is the reason why people are so angry at you in your article, is that Ricky Ross, the dope dealer, was supplied by the CIA because Blandone was an operative for the CIA, correct?
Blandone and Meneses were working for an army that was a wholly owned subsidiary of the CIA. They were meeting with CIA agents. Blandone, and this came out in court. I mean, Danilo Blandone is now a government witness. He works for the Drug Enforcement Administration, and we've paid him, $166,000 over the last 18 months because he's such a good informant. So they put him on the witness stand in Ricky Ross's case, and he testified that in 1981, he went to Honduras. He met with the commander, the military commander of the CIA's army, and he was instructed to go raise money in California for this Contra army. And he was told that the ends justified the means.
And those ends being sell cocaine.
Well, look, he was in the room with the Nicaraguan representative of the Cali cartel, Mr. Meneses, and he was in the room with a government marketing expert named Danilo Blandone. Now, if they weren't talking about selling cocaine, I don't know what they were talking about.
And this is all information they can find on a website. I have to use that website, but on a website on the internet. So we'll put that up so people can go and research, take a look at the documents yourself and judge it. But Michael, now, I mean, there's a stretch here. Here's a guy who is obviously a CIA operative, Mr. Blandone, who is working with this government-backed army that we've kind of created in Nicaragua. But how the heck does this guy get to bring in tons of cocaine? When I said ton, I'm talking tons. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 tons of cocaine weekly in the United States of America for 7 years, and no one can ever catch him.
Well, number one, Mr. Meneses was actually indicted in 1984. He was known within my own sources in DEA told me he was known as El Rey de la Droga, the king of drugs. He was in more than 40 files and indicted mysteriously, and people within DEA say that it was CIA intervention that kept this sealed indictment from ever being opened. So he was well known. He's well known. The connection between him, Blandón, and Calero, who was the head of the Nicaraguan government in exile, is clear. There's a clear evidentiary.
We got a picture of it.
Yeah, there's a clear evidentiary trail. Now, if you want to follow that trail up, you have to first understand how CIA and DEA work. I was a country attaché assigned to Argentina. Now, during those years, there were people who I inherited on the payroll who were murderers. They were also on the CIA payroll. So,
murderers. CIA payroll.
Not only murderers, I'm talking about mass murderers. And I wrote about it in books that I thought would have America marching on Washington. Nothing ever happened.
How are you alive today?
A miracle. Just absolutely.
Why didn't the CIA bump you off before you came to the Montel Williams show? Because to me, they will say tomorrow, he's a kook, he's crazy, don't believe anything he has to say, don't worry about it, there's no conspiracy.
Well, at the same time, DEA called me one of their best in a New York Times article. The only thing I can say, Montel, I lost my son, I lost my brother because of this phony CIA-backed drug flow. Somebody once said that if you don't have anything in your life to die for, you don't have anything to live for. And after losing my son, that's the story of my life. God bless Gary Webb. I've been trying to tell this, and other DEA agents are now coming out trying to tell this story.
Let me take a break. When we come back, we got a lot of people who disagree with all of this. They're here today. We're going to have a good argument. We'll be back right after this. The director of media analysis for Accuracy in Media, AIM, and says that what Mr. Webb wrote is incorrect. Please welcome Mr. Joe Golden to the show.
Okay, I'm going to cut the Montel Williams interview short. We know what they were going to say, trying to discredit Gary Webb, Mr. Levine, and others who basically have told you the truth about what the CIA is all about. But let's fast forward to today. And I wanted to play that to remind you that the same thing is going on now with ISIS. The CIA and the American government are funding this organization, but I want to go one step further and connect it also, like Tony Gambino said, to the papacy, to Rome. And if we don't do that, we're making a huge error. And all of these situations that we were talking about, the Contras, Nicaragua, all of this, you can bet the Jesuits had a hand in it. They're protected. They're almost like the top mafia boss. Now, I did find this, and I only have a few minutes. I'm going to play a couple minutes of this. Now, a man by the name of Bill Hughes, who had been on my show many, many, many times, he has written 2 small books called The Secret Terrorists and The Enemy Within, and Bill is a pastor, and he connects the dots to the papacy. And Al-Qaeda, ISIS, CIA, and the papacy, do they connect? Bill Hughes has done the homework, and they do connect. And it's a big mistake, he says, if you don't start researching this. So let's just play a little bit of a clip that I found of Bill Hughes talking about this subject.
This is the basis for it. The only time when I think it's important to study about conspiracy is when it is understood in the light of the drive of the papal power to take over the world. Folk, You know, a lot of people will take other things that have no relationship to Babylon the Great and turn that into some huge conspiracy itself. I back away from that because that's not our message. Our message is, in light of Revelation 17 and 18, in exposing Babylon the Great, we want to understand what is going on in our world in the context of Babylon the Great's drive to take over the world. Okay? So sometimes we can get sidetracked by what I would call, well, not riffraff, but side things that don't really connect it to the papal power. And I think, folk, if we do that, we're really missing the boat when it comes to understanding these last few chapters in the book of Revelation. Now, in the last 70 years of Earth's history, of this world's history, the last 70 years, that would be from 2015, go back another 55, till about, say, 1940, 1945. I want us to look this afternoon at how in the last 70 years, how the great controversy has been playing out in our world in the light of nations and in the light of events that have taken place. That's what we're going to look at this afternoon. And you can see it in the title, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, the CIA, and the papacy. Do they connect? Now, I believe, folk, at the end of this meeting, we will all agree, yes, they definitely connect. No questions asked. But how do they connect? Well, let's go back, a little bit of history. I personally love history. I was going to be a history teacher before I became a Seventh-day Adventist. Of course, my understanding of history has greatly changed over the years. But notice, you've got the three great Allied powers. Right towards the end of World War II, you have Churchill that ran England or Great Britain. You have Franklin Roosevelt, who ran the capitalist West or America. And you have Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet, well, at that point it was Russia, but it was in the process of becoming the Soviet Union. And as World War II came to an end, it became obvious that Hitler was not going to win, and the Japanese were not going to win. It was very clear as the war went on that America and Russia would divide up the world. Now that became very obvious. Now, the problem was the capitalist West, FDR, the entire economic fabric of the West was completely different than the ideology of Russia and communism. Completely different. And so after World War II, what developed in our world? It was like we went from one war right into another one. And what did we call it? It was called a Cold War.
Okay, and what I'm going to do is break it off there, and I'm going to play this tomorrow. So we'll be kind of interviewing Bill Hughes again through his one of his latest speeches, and maybe get a hold of him and see if he'll come on the show in a couple of weeks. Haven't talked to him in a long time, but we're going to make that connection as we showed you with the CIA connection. And if you look deep, you'll find the papacy connection there as well. When we talk about the Gary Webb and the drug trafficking, we even have Tony Gambino saying the Vatican gets a piece of the action there too. But we move forward to ISIS, Al Qaeda, etc., and you're going to see how all of these connect through the research done here by a number of people and Bill Hughes. Back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.